Talia said, we'll be speaking about transforming or defining a strategy towards desktop as a service for your organization. We will run through an agenda of where the current state of desktop virtualization is, what some of the barriers to adopting a desktop virtualization strategy is, where we've seen and what we've seen for an approach for success, so the differences between server and desktop workloads, the importance of storage and I/O in a desktop virtualization solution specifically for VDI, some of the network implications, pillars or ingredients for success, and other things to consider. So we'll start out with a few questions around, hype versus reality, and what is the market or vendor saying, and what's the reality of what's out there. So some of these may be very well known, others may be new. So desktop virtualization or VDI has CapEx savings, and I think that the market has sort of had this concept or had tried to apply this concept that you can get similar savings, but the reality is that very different than server virtualization, where you can consolidate several hundred servers down to several physical servers and get a pretty immediate CapEx savings. Desktop virtualization is more of an OpEx play. So can you get the price point for a virtual desktop down around the same price as a physical desktop? You can get close to that, and I'm sure over time it'll get even more competitive. But for right now, if you're looking at saying, I'm going to save money by going to a desktop virtualization side on the CapEx side, that's probably not going to be the case. A single vendor stack can deliver all the benefits of desktop virtualization or VDI to all the user types in your organization. So we work with a lot of customers who feel that they have to make a choice. I have to pick either VMware or Citrix. And the fact is that we haven't found a vendor that really can deliver the full suite of solutions to all the different types of users in an organization. There are certain vendors that can take it fairly far down the road, but there will be some additional third-party ecosystem tools that will have to be introduced to really fill out the entire solution. So, and we typically see a mix and match of vendor technologies. So another hype is, VDI is simply a P2V, if you will, or a move or transformation from a physical desktop. You're just going to sort of pick it up and put it in the data center. And the fact of the matter is that there's a variety of ways to deliver that same desktop capability from the operating system through applications and services to those end users. So it doesn't have to be a pickup from the endpoint and place it into the data center, nor should it be looked at as a complete P2V. So you have to look at the entire stack of what makes up a desktop and figure out how you can attack each layer. So how do you virtualize the operating system? How do you virtualize the applications? How do you virtualize personality or the persona of the desktop for the user? And those things may live in the data element, right? So the data is local in the desktop. Where does that move, and how do you determine the right tier of storage to put that data on? And so there's a lot more complexity when you start to move towards a VDI solution. VDI requires enterprise storage. So again, in the case of if you're looking at VDI, in order to provide an equal to or better than user experience, the reality is that there are technologies that exist today which enable customers to leverage a combination of tiers of storage to deliver an equal to or better than experience to their end users while keeping costs low and keeping that total virtual desktop cost down around the same price points as a physical desktop. That's sort of just where the market is. We'll go through why customers are deploying desktop virtualization and what we see out there and the types of customers that we're working with. So there's sort of two number one drivers, if you will. One is customers' desire to protect and secure their data. So all of that data, all the applications, everything sits out at the edge on users' desktops or their laptops, and there's a risk or an exposure to that, to data leakage, and so they want to centralize that and better control that data. And it could also be from a compliance point of view. They want to be sure that the data is centrally stored and they can report on their ability to meet different regulatory requirements. The other one, which falls down into the last category, bring your own computer to work, is the growth and demand of whether it's the iPad or any other type of non-Windows-based device that end users want to bring in, typically executives, into the environment or into the workplace and want to still access all of their office productivity applications, some of the business applications, and email. And so there's this challenge of how do you provide the access to the applications and the data that those folks need while allowing them to use, quote unquote, an untrusted device, a device that the company doesn't own, the company did not put the operating system down on, can't patch it. So how do you provide that same capability? So that demand is really driving some of the VDI work that we're seeing out there. And the other ones fall into workplace mobility, business continuity, Windows 7 migrations. A lot of, I have a Windows 7 initiative. Doesn't make sense to look at desktop virtualization in line with my Windows 7 strategy. Should I do them separately? Where can I combine them? So a lot of questions around that, and we see a lot of integration between Windows 7 or customers looking at Windows 7 and desktop virtualization. Where do we see these implementations primarily focused? Probably no surprise in financial companies, large financials who are looking at opportunities or ways to streamline costs or reduce costs with their large footprint, and again, potentially look at it as a competitive advantage for their organization. Insurance companies, healthcare, hospitals, things like that, where you have clinicians who need access to patient records and don't have the time to log in and log off of traditional desktops and take that time, so they want quicker access to those records and be able to move around the hospital or whatever and room to room and get access to the records that they need. And then tactical use cases. So customers that are looking at call centers, offshore developers, or contractors. Instead of contractors coming in and having to provide them a company-owned or a company-provided laptop, again, going back to that bring your own computer to work, if you have a solution in place where they can come in and securely access your data and applications, you can support them. Most of the implementations we're seeing today are use case driven, or there's a business driver or risk that's associated with why they're looking at virtualizing their desktop, specifically VDI. So there are a lot of companies doing, Zen app and providing published desktops or published applications. But what we're seeing now is where those solutions may not meet the need or fulfill the need, we're seeing these tactical use cases. So it's not something widespread, but we see VDI and desktop virtualization as a component of an overall company's desktop strategy. So how do you really measure success, and what does success look like in the desktop virtualization project? And it's really comes down to a balance between providing the best user experience at the lowest price point, but giving the user a feature-rich desktop. So you don't want to make it so scaled down and unusable that you take the personal out of personal computer, but you also don't want to spend, give them free reign where they can do whatever they want. So it's really finding this balancing act between the three and understanding which one or two of these are most important and making sure you drive towards that. But the criteria is very different. So in server virtualization, it was all about what's my consolidation ratio? How many physical servers can I fit, or how many virtual servers can I fit on a physical server? And the desktop, it's really about user experience and access to data and applications. So what have been some of the barriers that we've seen to why, maybe either desktop virtualization or VDI or whatever you want to call it, it's not taken off? And I think the first most important one is the difficulty in creating a business case. So a lot of customers saying, okay, there may not be an ROI, but what is the TCO? How do I create that? If there's not a risk, if there's not an immediate issue or exposure that I'm trying to plug a hole for, then what is it? And the ROI is not as easy to create as it was for server virtualization. Storage architectures and I/O requirements. Again, the misunderstanding of what types of storage you need, how to architect the storage back end, what are the I/O demands of a desktop versus a server, how do I design for that, becomes a barrier, because either companies are going to over-provision storage in order to try and create as many, provide as many spindles as possible to serve up the I/Os and reduce that, or they're going to under-provision it because they want to save on money. Either way is a bad combination. So either buying too much causes you to say that the solution is just out of reach. I can't justify moving in that direction. Buying too little causes performance issues and pushback from the user base, which kills the project as well. User experience, some of that goes hand in hand with the storage and the I/O on the back end. Some of it goes with the protocols and the broker decisions that are made throughout the exercise, and potentially trying to map users to the wrong solution. So it could be that this user really shouldn't have to fit a VDI category, but folks are just taking VDI and saying every user is the same, and so I'm going to apply that same theory to a power user as I do to a knowledge worker, to any other type of IT person or developer, and it just doesn't fit. So every user is not created equal, and so user experience becomes a big issue to push back. To some extent, the complexity of the options. So, you can go with the easy way and say, I'm just going to stick with a single vendor stack. But then you're going to realize that there are some deficiencies in that vendor's stack of technologies, whether it's not good across the WAN, whether it's not good for rich media, whether it doesn't support non-Windows-based devices, or you're going to say, okay, then I have to mix and match vendor technologies, but that becomes complex also. How do I get support for that? Is there going to be a supportability issue if I run a certain hypervisor with a different vendor broker and a different vendor application virtualization layer? So really understanding those trade-offs and making the right decision, again, based on what the user needs are, not what the technology needs are. Cultural impediments, and trying to get everyone on the same page internally within an organization. And then best practices. Those really are evolving. So while companies like GlassHouse have done many desktop virtualization designs and architectures and have learned a lot over the past few years, these are not very well published out there, and you can't go somewhere and look at best practices for doing these types of projects as you can, let's say, for server virtualization, which was in probably the same state several years ago where there were no best practices, but you could probably find quite a bit of best practices today for that. So what's an approach for success? What have we seen when a company has approached it the right way? What have they done, and how did they succeed versus those that may have approached it a different way and failed? So understanding your users, that's really the key. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the applications and the data in your organization. And if you understand that, and you understand how your users need to interact with their endpoint device, with those applications, with those business services, then you have a better shot at delivering a quality desktop virtualization experience. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. It may be a combination of solutions, that at the end of the day all leverage an underlying component to deliver the service. So it could be XenApp, maybe the best solution. It could be that just virtualizing your application could be the right solution, or VDI. But it's going to depend on who and what the users are and understanding their needs. So how do you do that? And what we do is we really recommend that customers or organizations profile their users and their applications to really determine what that optimal desktop solution is. And so, once you understand what the mobility needs are, what the security needs are, what the application needs are, where those users exist, that's going to drive the decision. That'll drive a desktop architecture. That desktop architecture will drive certain underlying technology decisions, and then you'll get to a point where you can leverage those common technology decisions to support multiple types of users. So what are some of the common user types that we've come across and we've developed reference architectures for, and ultimately technology designs for, are the task worker, the knowledge worker, mobile user, remote user. So these are several of the common user profile types, each one having underneath that heading a description of what that type of worker is. So a task worker looks and feels like this. What some of the alternatives to providing a virtualized desktop to a task worker is, what some of the trade-offs are, the drawbacks and benefits, and what are some of the technology alternatives that you can deliver for those types of users. And what you want to get to is, eventually, once you understand which of those users you have in your organization, you really want to get to a point where, at the bottom, you've got a number of IT service components. So starting on the left, you've got a virtualized OS. The box with the paper is a application that's been virtualized. The person is the personality, persona that's been virtualized. You have hypervisors, you have Blade PCs, client-side hypervisors, or potentially running some type of multiple virtual machines at the endpoint device. And if you could define these IT service components and you understand the types of users that you have in your organization, you can now determine which of these components they'll consume as part of their virtualized desktop. And so you see that it could be different users will consume different underlying service components or virtualized service components. But it's not a different one for each user. So it's not a different advert layer for those different profiles of users. You're just leveraging that same virtualized application to deliver to different types of desktop architectures. So this is really where I think customers want to try and get to. And if you can get to here, then it really shouldn't make a difference what the endpoint device is. If it's done right, then the user should be able to log in from any type of non-Windows device. They should be able to log in from a thick client, from their home, from anywhere, and feel and have the same look and feel, have the same user experience no matter where they log in from. And I think that's where the industry wants to get to. Now, it sounds a lot easier than it is, and so some of it has to do with what state the applications are in and how you can really consume them, either from a cloud-based model, if you will, or if you still have to push them out to the endpoint device. This slide just really speaks to the fact that you may wind up with different architectures, underlying architectures, and some of the drawbacks and benefits to each one, and then you don't have to pick one and apply it and say, well, I'm just going to deploy a hybrid model to all my users. Again, you may wind up with different user base in different camps of these solutions, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, going back to this slide, as long as you define the underlying service components, then whatever type of user you have, you're just going to allow them to consume that particular virtualized environment. So what are some of the workload differences between desktop and server that you need to be aware of as you embark down this path? So on the server side, you have diversity within a cluster of servers. So if you look at all the servers, you've got applications that are all doing different things and operating differently, even if it's virtualized servers. On the desktop, you have sort of a consistent type of experience, or you have more homogeneity on the within the cluster. So you have a bunch of desktops that run an operating system, run probably a bunch of productivity applications, but they're all pretty much the same. On the server, you're going to have randomized, so you'll have peaks that will drive I/O, but it's going to be across the different application servers, and they're not all going to be spiking at one time. So you may have one application that may have end of quarter, end of month. That's going to work a little harder today, but it's going to be quiet the rest of the month. Whereas on the desktop, you're going to have this constant banging of peaks because users are going to be doing similar things, whether it's all coming in to log in the morning, whether it's booting in the morning, whether it's running virus scans, whatever it is, you can have these various peaks throughout the day. On the server side, the I/Os are chiefly application driven. So the application is going to drive the load, whereas on the desktop, the user is going to drive the load by launching and closing and opening and closing applications and opening large files and running huge macros and things like that. So at the end of the day, what happens is you've got this fluctuation of performance on the server, which has low to moderate visibility from the end user. So the end user won't really notice if a server takes a little bit longer to do something on the back end. However, if they're interfacing or interacting with their desktop locally, they're going to notice when applications don't open as quickly, or that response of data coming back doesn't happen as quickly as they're used to when they were in the physical world. So it's got a highly visible to the end user when you're talking about the desktop. And you have different workload volatility as a result. So you really have to consider what are the I/O demands of the desktop versus the server when you bring that into the data center. So looking at some of the storage and storage I/O impacts, the one thing that we notice with a lot of customers is that desktop storage I/O is underestimated. So oftentimes the storage folks or the folks who architect the back-end solution for the desktop group assumes that a desktop is simply a desktop and doesn't really have huge demands on it, and doesn't have SATA drives or some type of internal drive, and so they just assume that the same type of environment is adequate inside the data center. However, when you start to really dig under the covers and you start looking at the IOPS that are required to really serve up a good user experience for customers, you start to see that there are some significant I/O requirements, which adversely impact the overall user experience. What we also see is that companies tend to start with an XP image and say, this is my current desktop image, and I have that running in a virtualized state, and I have to, and I'm moving to Windows 7, and they use those same metrics, the same I/O metrics that XP is driving, without realizing that there's actually a significant percentage uplift on I/O with Windows 7. Now that can be tuned to bring it more in line, but out of the box, uncustomized, Windows 7 does take up or require much more, a large percentage of I/O than Windows XP. And then going back to the point made earlier, most companies misallocate storage, so they will either allocate too little because they want to make sure that they're not certain about the project, it may fail, they don't want to wind up with all the storage, so they buy very little storage, and what happens is performance suffers because you've got a couple of hundred users banging on storage that really wasn't optimized for the number of users that are consuming it, or they buy too much storage because they don't know, and they just want to be sure that the customers don't complain. And then they wind up with an over-provisioned farm, and the cost is out of whack. Either one is not a good situation to be in. So what happens over time as you start to, from the left-hand side, you have several hundred users on a storage array, and those IOPS are able to satisfy all 100 users. And over time, as you add more users, what tends to happen is the IOs have to be shared across those users. And so the more users you add, the fewer IOs that they have served up to them to satisfy their needs, until you reach a point where user experience continually degrades over time as you add more virtual desktops to the environment. So can you throw hardware at the problem? It's not going to solve the performance of the I/O issues. It may be short-term relief, but long-term it's not going to solve the issue. So what we've seen work is alternative solutions that increase the reads or offload the reads and writes from the back-end storage array. So it could be things such as SSD, solid-state disks, that you incorporate into your overall solution, potentially putting your volatile OS on that and your user data elsewhere, or non-storage-based caching and dedupe technologies from companies that allow you to offload I/O in the hypervisor, thereby serving up more I/O out of memory, and just the ones that are unique have to go to the back-end storage array. From a network point of view, latency and user requirements will determine what the right protocol is. Again, rich media graphics, how latent the link is, all those things will go into determining what the best protocol is. The protocol that is typically selected on the LAN, and we see this several times with customers, that they pick they stand up a virtualized environment on the LAN, and they try and, or they assume that the same performance will be achieved on the wider network, and that's not the case. Increasing bandwidth is not going to improve individual user experience. LAN accelerators are not a guarantee to increase performance. There's additional network bandwidth, even if it's not VDI, printing bandwidth and other types of bandwidth introductions that may not have been there prior to you centralizing your solution, whether you're using XenApp or VDI or some other form to centralize your desktop compute. So working with the network team to really understand what that network impact is crucial for success, to be sure that you can support those users, or potentially doesn't mean that you have to put a more localized footprint somewhere to try and alleviate the latency on the user experience. From operational considerations point of view, so these are sort of the ingredients for a successful deployment. Determine what the optimal solution is. Look at design alternatives. Don't go in with a XenApp is going to fix all my problems, VDI is going to fix all my problems, something else is going to fix all my problems. You may wind up with different underlying architectures that still deliver a virtualized state to the end users, but that will give you the broadest adoption rate. Standard and process, similar to the server world, where we have these physical servers that were all running, that had their own dedicated memory and CPU for running their services. The desktops do as well. So we run antivirus, we patch them. All of those operational processes have to be reviewed, and those legacy standards really need to be transformed in order to negate suboptimal performance once you centralize your compute. Deployment and provisioning. As you look at a desktop virtualization strategy, whatever it might be, getting to the end game as quickly as you can is what will give you the biggest bang for the buck, or give you the biggest benefit and savings. So how do you do that, and how do you manage that transformation? How do you make sure that all of the elements that are going to allow you to get to that successful endpoint are addressed? So are all the applications supportable? Are they ready? Are they virtualized? If they can't be virtualized for Windows 7 or they can't run on Windows 7, what is the alternative to providing those applications to your Windows 7 desktops? All of that, all of those moving parts have to be monitored and governed, and there are solutions out there that can help you get to that point. And then once you're there, how do you ensure integrity of the environment, whether it's, again, XenApp, or it's a OS streaming solution, or it's an Advert solution, to make sure that the user experience does not suffer over time, that you maintain a consistent user environment that will then in turn deliver the best user experience and performance. Other considerations, I'm assuming that most of the folks on the call probably are aware of the licensing implications and the previous licensing that Microsoft had for VECD, and what it meant if you wanted to take your desktop and move it into the data center, what that implication was. So that was an initial stumbling block. Microsoft has changed their pricing. So this was effective July 1st, where if you have software assurance, you effectively get that VACD, which is what they call it now, or VDA, for free. If you're not covered by SA, you still have to pay for the license. So they keep changing, and Microsoft continues to change the licensing. So it's always good to check to be sure you understand what your licensing structure is, because as you look to virtualize your environment, depending on which way you opt to virtualize it, there may be a significant investment required from a licensing point of view. So from an overall best practices point of view, think big picture. So view it as a desktop strategy where desktop virtualization is a part of that strategy. What that means, what desktop virtualization means, whether it's XenApp, whether it's app virtualization, whether it's VDI, you need to understand that, but just you have one chance to really start to reshape your desktop strategy with the Windows 7 and everything else. So include everything, plan it strategically, and implement it in phases. Don't let technology bias guide your decision. So we've seen this many times with customers where they are a Citrix shop, they're a VMware shop, they're a Microsoft shop, and that's what drives the decision. Granted, that should be taken into account from an investment protection, a skill set, an operational, point of view, because you know how to operate and care and feed for those types of environments. But you really need to take a step back, forget the technology for a moment, look at your users, understand what their needs are, understand what the applications are, and then apply, or at least try to map as much of your existing investment against that, but be aware that there may be, that you may have to change some of those decisions. But at least you'll know what the drawbacks are at that point. So, but don't blindly just say we're an XYZ shop and we only can implement XYZ. Profile your users to even determine if they're a fit. So, for, in this case, VDI. So not all users are created equal, and you have to understand that they all operate and they have different needs. So they have different mobility, security needs, and different needs for applications. So you have to understand what those are, and then determine what the right architecture and the technology is. Consider alternative storage and caching technologies to support those I/O demands. So look at tiering your storage, look at solid-state disk where appropriate, look at, they've got the Fusion I/O cards, they've got software-based I/O caching technologies. look at those, test those out, and see how they may benefit the overall user experience for the and the price. So it's the price and that whole point about the balancing act between the right price point, the right user experience, and the feature-rich desktop. And then realize that it's all about the applications. That's why businesses work, because they have applications and data that helps them drive their business. So once you understand that, everything else will fall into place as far as what is the right solution for your customer base. And then don't mix and match server and desktop workloads. So one of the other things with that is we've seen issues where I/O on a desktop virtualization on a shared SAN environment running with other production applications. We've seen issues where the I/O demands of the desktop exceeded what the storage array was capable of and adversely impacted a company's ability to do their core business and run their core applications. So just like don't mix and match server and desktop workloads, really consider what those I/O workloads are before you put them on your existing storage array that was built for your core applications. So that really ends the webinar for the day, and I hope that was informative. And Natalia, I don't know if we open up for questions or we.
So yes, I have some questions for you. Everyone else, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat module or the questions pane, and I will forward these on to John. So John, the first question we received was, what was the source for the 1% VDI penetration figure that was quoted in your slide?
I'll have to check on that. I believe that came from VMware themselves. I was doing a talk with the CTO from VMware, and that's where that came from, to a bunch of C-level executives.
Okay.
So that was from VMware.
The next question was, are you offering VM checkout and check-ins for offline use? And what is the real-world requirement per user for network connectivity?
So the first part of the question is, do we see check-in, check-out?
It says, are you offering VM checkout and check-ins for offline use?
Okay, so we don't offer, we're a services company, so that is something that customers are interested in. However, whether it's the VMware solution or the Citrix Zen client solution, both are not very mature right now. We don't see customers implementing those at this point. We do see them, evaluating it and kicking the tires, but certainly not implementing those. Second part of the question was,
what is real-world requirement per user for network connectivity?
Yeah, I'll have to. If you can take that question down, Natalia, I'll have to get dig through some notes and give some sort of order of magnitude sizing for those different types of solutions or users.
Okay, will do. Next question is, wouldn't WAN-based apps perform better with VDI than being run from the desktop?
Would they run better?
Wouldn't they?
Wouldn't they run better in VDI than run from the desktop? Is that the question?
Yes, I'll repeat it. Wouldn't WAN-based applications perform better with VDI than being run from the desktop?
All right, I'm gonna have to. If I understand the question, and if I misunderstood it, just take a note of that, and we'll get the right answer. We'll get the corrected answer back. But it's going to depend on what you're looking to do. So in some cases, if the application that you're running is in the data center already, and that's where the data resides, then VDI may be a better solution, or a terminal servers and app type thing, so that the processing of the application and the data is local. But that's not always the case. So it would have to be a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Does file deduplication have any role in VDI? And so maintaining hundreds of nearly identical but not exactly identical OS disk images has always seemed inefficient in an enterprise storage sense.
Yep.
So the question is, does file deduplication have any role in VDI?
So there are ways to dedupe within VDI, absolutely. At the OS level, so from an image management, there are solutions out there that can help you with managing your single disk image, whether it's from Unidesk or Atlantis, Ilio, or some of those other solutions, link clones, things like that. From a file level point of view, that's probably better served on the storage array itself, the dedupe capability. But the OS image point of view, there are certainly solutions out there that can address it.
Great. So if I want to explore the feasibility of moving to desktop virtualization in my company, who needs to be a part of this discussion to ensure any outcome is successful, and which stakeholders are critical and which are possibly overlooked?
Okay, so it's of course the server guys, the storage guys, the network guys. Probably want your security folks there. You probably want some business stakeholders there. Disaster recovery, business continuity. Your client services person, so whoever owns the desktop, and the help desk folks, your application packagers. You want all those folks in the room because all of them have a vested interest, or at least will have an opinion. And it's better to have that opinion up front and have their input up front than potentially leave any of those out, only to find out that you're a few months down the road of going through the process and the design work where they throw something in that slows down the process. So it's better to have all those folks in the room up front. It may be painful, but it's going to get you to the end game a lot faster.
Okay. Someone asked, what about Chrome OS and software as a service combination?
We don't. Yeah. So that I think is something that we're going to see evolve. I think the market today is still maturing. So I think we're still in the state of desktop virtualization maturing. So I think you'll see more of that integration over the next year or two.
Okay. Do you have any talking points with regard to bring your own PC related to MSSA licensing?
I can get those to whoever asked that question.
Okay. What are the hidden costs of VDI?
So originally it was the licensing. I think that was a big hidden cost that people just didn't understand, and I think that was because even Microsoft and others were confused about it, and so it's that training. So whether it's training your end users on the new capabilities, or it's training your internal staff on the fact that this thing is going to potentially live in your data center and it needs certain care and feeding. So those are the typical ones that we see.
Okay. And this is the last question for today. If anyone else has any more questions, feel free to send them along, and we'll have John email you directly. So the last question for today is, can you go into more detail on the issue of performance degradation over time as users are added? You said throwing more hardware at it will not help, and what do you recommend for scaling a more modular approach?
Yeah, so every storage array has a maximum number of I/O that it can serve up, and once it reaches that, you can't add more I/O. So that's where the throwing disk at it will work to a point, but it won't be a good long-term strategy, because at some point you're going to hit the maximum capability of that array. So you need to start to look at different ways to offload the I/O, and whether that's using solid-state disk drives, or it's a combination of that and products like Atlantis ILIO or Semantic Virtual Store, where that I/O offload occurs in memory on the hypervisor, and I/Os or data blocks are cached in memory and retrieved in memory without those virtual desktops having to wait to go across the network hitting a storage array. Now, you could argue that, well, you could put PAM cards, for example, on the NetApp or the caching stuff on the storage array. We've seen an improved performance, but it's certainly not anywhere near the hypervisor-based memory caching technology. So, and from a modularity point of view, I think already VMware, if you're looking at a VDI solution, there's already limitations on how big you can build out the chunks. So I think VMware views at 5,000 blocks, Citrix with their broker and Zen Desktop and all that, I think there's no limit. But yeah, I think there are ways that you can chunk up the deployment and your storage. So we can certainly get you ideas on that.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar. I will send over the presentation for your reference. And please look out for additional webcasts by GlassHouse. Thanks. Have a good day, everyone.